Okay, welcome everybody. Today's daf is Masechta Zevachim Daf Mem Tes, and let's just begin. Yesterday we began the sugya of Ezehu Makaimen. This parak is what we say every day in davening. Ezehu Makaimen Shel Zevachim. Where is the place that you slaughter karbanos? So Kachi Kachim, the Kachi Kachim Shchitasam B'Tzafin, on the north side of the Beis Hamikdash, north, probably opposite the Mizbeach, straight away on the north, is you slaughter Kachi Kachim. So Kachi Kachim includes holy karbonis, which is the carbon chatas, which is brought to if someone did an Aveira, and carbon oila. So here we go. Let us go to the page that we're up to, which is 34. Let's see. Okay, let's see. Yeah. So we learned here we go. Daf Memchesam and Beis on the bottom. So the Gemara says, now one thing you have to know, a very, very important point, and that is that although the Torah will tell you an idea by carbon, it has to repeat that idea. Because the first time it tells you it's a mitzvah to do it, but not a ma'akiv. It's not gonna, if you didn't do it, you still yaitze. So, but we have to have it repeated in order for it to be ma'akiv. This is a din by kachim. So let's make it big. So the Gemara says we're starting from Mem Chesam and Beis, 5 lines from the bottom. So Ashka Chachita ba'oila. I found shchita by carbon oila. The pasuk says we say it every day in davening. With shochat oisa yerachim smeat safaynu l'fnei Hashem. So I know shchita on a carbon oila that has to be done in the north. That's a mitzvah. Kabbalah nami la mitzvah ashkachan. And we have another limud that tells you that when you catch the blood, it also has to be in the north. Shchita v'kabbalah la'akev minolam. Here the key word is la'akev. How do you know that if you don't do it, the carbon is pasul? The carbon is disqualified. How do you know? Where did the Torah repeat itself? The Torah didn't repeat itself, but it is it's a kal v'chomer. It's a kal v'chomer that it's ma'akiv. Ma chatos habo mikoy chayla. The whole idea that a carbon chatos has to be slaughtered in the north, we know that only because of a carbon oila, right? Because the Gemara yesterday produced that connection, juxtapose chatas to an oila. The Torah tells you a chatas is like an oila. And the Torah even repeats that idea. So we know a chatas is ma'akeves. So machatas is, if you don't do it in the north, it's disqualified. And chatas is only derived that it has to be in the north because it's like an oila. So the chatas is secondary and the oila is the primary source. So oila sheba chatas mikoicha, so oila, that chatas is learned from it, so oila is the primary source. Ein din shema akeves. Certainly, it should be an absolute requirement that an oila has to be geschachten in the north. Answers the Gemara, no, maybe chatas is more severe. Malachatas shekei mechaperes al chayav krisis. Chatas, since it's being brought to bring atonement, therefore of our chayv krisis. Therefore, maybe there's a hakpada on the Torah. The Torah is didactic about it, that it has to be done in the north. But an oila, not. Even though oila is the primary source. Ravina says, Hakashi le Rav Ada bar Ahava. This question Rav Ada bar Ahava asked, and he answered, and he said that it can't be that way, that a chatas would be ma'akiv, and an oila would not be ma'akiv. Klum etzinu tafel chama min ikar. Do we find anything that is secondary more stricter than the main primary source? Something that's learned from something cannot be more stricter than the original source that it's learning from. I'm going to have you 3 questions. We'll find that in throughout the Torah that something secondary could be more stricter than the primary. We go to Memtes Amad Aleph. V'harei masa sheni, right? Let's say fruits of masa sheni. Even if you brought it to Yerushalayim and it became tamei, dehu nifta, you could redeem it. Okay? Let's say you redeemed Maisa Sheni on money and then bought some food with it, and that became Tameh, Ein Nifta, it cannot become redeemed. The Tnan, we learned in the Mishnah, Halakuach Bekasav Maisa Shenitma, Yipadeh, Rabbi Yehuda Ime Yikaver. Rabbi Yehuda says that anything bought from Kesem Maisa, the money of Maisa Sheni, that became Tameh, so already you applied it, you don't repaid it. What you do is you bury it. So we see that the primary Meiser, the Meiser Sheni, could be redeemed, and the secondary, something bought with Meiser Sheni, cannot be redeemed. So we see that the secondary is more stricter than the primary. And says the Gemara, no. Hasam loy alima kedushasai lemitvis pidyaine. It's not a strictness, it's a weakness in something bought with the kesef meiser that it doesn't have such a powerful kedusha to latch itself on to the pidyon, to the money again. So it's a lighter form of kedusha for I guess stuff bought from the money of Meiser Sheni, and therefore pidyon, you can't be paid to that any further. So it's actually a weakness, not a strictness. Says the Gemara, Vahare Tumura. Tumura. What is Tumura? Tumura is, if let's say I have kachim, let's say I have an oila, a nice sheep, and I put another sheep next to it and say, this sheep should be like that sheep. So it works. Now, but each Tumura is a secondary type of Kedusha. And yet there's more of a strictness of Tumura than an original type of Kedusha. The ilu, kachim loy chayle al balmum kavua. If I make kachim and I say this should be holy, this should be a carbon oila, if it has a permanent handicap, if the animal is permanently damaged, kachim would not take effect. It would be a kedushas damim, but it wouldn't have a kedushas aguf of a carbon. And there's a difference between kedushas aguf and kedushas damim. If it's a carbon type of holiness, then even if you redeem it eventually, you can't work with it. You can't share the hair. You can't work with it. Giza, the growth of it. You can't cut it. Whatever. The bottom line is you cannot be makdish for a carbon that has a balmum. V'li'ihu kalit. But if I have a tamur, if I have a regular oil, and I say that this animal that has the candy cap should be like this, so I make a tamura on an animal that has a balmum, it works. So we see tamura, which should be secondary than original kachim, works on a balmum. And says the Gemara, no, that is the strength of a tamura. Tamura mekoyach kachim ka'asya. Tamura comes from an animal that's already hegdish. So you're just transferring kedusha or saying this animal with the balmum should be like the one with the hegdish. So then it could work because it's coming from a holy animal. The kachim mekayach chulin kaasi. But if you want to turn a chulin animal into a kachim, it has to be free of mumen because there it's not so powerful. So it's just through your mouth. So it seems like kachim is like a something growing. You first make an animal kodesh, and then it gets even holier, where it can make even a balmum holy. Now the Gemara says, Vari Pesach. Pesach, carbon Pesach, will find that the secondary of a carbon Pesach, what's a secondary of a carbon Pesach? Let's say a carbon Pesach was lost. Yeah, you separated a sheep for your carbon Pesach, and then it got lost, it ran away, and so you replaced it, and then you found the original sheep. So you already yotze your carbon Pesach. So the sheep that you found, your original, becomes a shlamim. So it's a secondary carbon Pesach, and yet it has more dinim than the original carbon Pesach. Because Hare Pesach, the regular Pesach, it doesn't have these dinim, smicha, nesachem, and waving of the breast and the thigh. The ilu moisar today, but if something's brought as a replacement of a carbon Pesach, it means it's the leftover of a carbon Pesach. In fact, you replaced the carbon Pesach because it was lost, and then you found the original. Then it becomes a shlamim. So we see that the secondary of a carbon Pesach is more stricter than the original carbon Pesach. And says the Gemara, Pesach b'sha'ar yemois Hashanah shlamim. A Pesach, all the other, in the entire year is a carbon shlamim. So therefore, every Pesach, you look at it as a carbon Pesach, but really it's a shlamim. It's originally as a shlamim. As it approaches the yontiv of Pesach, it becomes a carbon Pesach. But then after Pesach, if it wasn't slaughtered, then it reverts to a bag a shlamim. So it's not like it's coming from a carbon Pesach. It originally is a shlamim. So therefore, the bottom line is, what did this all lead to? How do I know that a carbon oila b'di'evet, you need to shecht it in the north? The answer is, since something learned from the oila, the chatas, if you don't shecht it in the north, it's possible. And so the primary source of that idea is from the oila. The Torah repeats it twice by the chatas to teach you that it's ma'akiv, that it's absolute, and if you don't do it, the carbon is possible. So even though the Torah only teaches you one time by the oila, it's not possible that a secondary item that's learned from the primary should be more stricter than the primary. So therefore, even by a carbon oila, b'di'evet, if you don't do it in the north, it disqualifies the carbon. The Ibaisim, if you want, I'm going to bring another source. On Makra, the pasuk says, ha'oila b'mkaimetiyeh. The Torah also, the Torah said ha'oila, kechatas oila. It could have said like a chatas. It's an extra ha'oila that it always the oila. It's that the oila also has to remain where you slaughter the oila. The Torah repeated it, the idea with a ha'oila to teach you that it's absolutely has to be done in the north. Okay, so now we have it squared away that a carbon chatas, it has to be slaughtered in the north. A carbon oila has to be slaughtered in the north. And if you don't do it, then the carbon is disqualified. So now the Gemara asks a question. Asham, a carbon asham, manalan debayit safin. How do you know an asham needs it in the north? Answers the Gemara because it says by every asham, bimkoim asher yishchatu es ha'oila, yishchatu es ha'asham. Torah tells you in the place that you're going to slaughter the oila, that's where you should slaughter the asham. So the Gemara says, Ashka chad shchita. Now I know shchita, you slaughter the asham in the north. Kabbalah manalan. How do I know you have to catch the blood in the north? Maybe you can just move the animal to the south and catch the blood there. So the Gemara says, ve'es damai. The Vav says right away you should catch the blood at the same place that you're shechting it, which is in the north. So kibbutz nami b'tzafin. So the catching of the blood also has to be in the north. The question is, mekabel atzbay b'nolan. How do you know the guy himself has to be standing in the north? Maybe the animal could be in the north, the catching of the blood could be in the north, but in the south, with maybe a long hand, the person himself, the kohen who's doing all this, could be standing in the south. And says the Gemara, it could have said damai. It says ve'es. The es, damai, includes whoever is involved with this carbon. So it's not only the kohen doing the shchita, or whatever who is, and the Kabbalah, and the person all have to be in the north. So now, again, the same idea. Just because I tell you one time by a carbon asham that it has to be done in the north, doesn't mean that it's not a myth, it's not la'akev. It doesn't disqualify the carbon if you didn't do it that way. So now the Gemara asks that question. Ashkechan mitzvah. I understand that it's a mitzvah la'akev menalam that could hold up the kapara and that it's absolute. And so I need another pasuk. Kra achina ksiv. There's another pasuk by another asham called an asham mitzayra. There the Torah says shachat as a keves in the place that you shach the oila. So by mitzayra, the Torah tells you to shecht the carbon in the north. Well, I know carbon asham mitzayra is like a regular asham. It already tells you by a regular asham to shecht it in the north. So why does it say by an asham mitzayra to shecht it in the north? It's a repeat to tell you that shechting it in Kabbalah it has to be done in the north, and it's ma'akev. Says the Gemara, v'hai lahachi yudasa. Is it coming to teach you that idea? The Torah had to repeat everything by an asham mitzayra, and therefore it's not extra. The Gemara is going to say because an asham mitzayra, I would think, should not have a din like an asham mitzayra, because what's unique about an asham mitzayra is not only you sprinkle things on the mizbeach, but you're also sprinkling on the body of the human being, of the mitzvah. So I would think that what the Gemara is going to say, that the Torah has to repeat all the ideas of an Orsham by an Orsham Mitzvah, so you shouldn't think that it's not included in the group. It's a different than a regular Orsham. Jaime Boyle, look at the Tanya. I need it like what we learned in the Brisa. The Brisa says, Dava Shahaya B'chlal, V'yotza Lidem B'davra HaChadosh, Iyata Yoch Rashoy Lachzir L'choloi, Achi Yachzreina Kosav L'chlal B'feirs. Ketzad. There's a klal that we say every day in davening. The Torah tells you like this: "V'sochad as a keves b'mkoyim asher yishchatas chatas v'soyla b'mkoyim akoydik chatas ha'asham hu." The Torah tells you this is the complete pasuk by a carbon asham that you shecht it in the place that you shecht the chatas and the oila, and which is in the north, and it's like a chatas. This asham is like a regular chatas. She'ein tamad loyin kachatas asham. Why does the Torah tell you that this asham is like a chatas? Ma tamad loyin kachatas asham. Asham, this Asham Mitzvah has something unique. You put the blood on the toe and the thumb and the right earlobe. You put the blood there on the Mitzvah himself. So I might think such a unique carbon. I might think you don't sprinkle anything on the Mizbeach, and you don't put any of the Amorim, the fats of the carbon, on the Mizbeach. That's why the Torah had to say, no, since there was a unique din that took Asham away from the regular Ashams, so now the Torah has to repeat that regarding everything else, it's like a regular Asham. That it does, so therefore, the Torah tells you that this Asham Mitzvah is like a regular Asham Mitzvah, and you have to put the blood and the Amorin on the Mizbeach. And therefore, the Torah had to also repeat that the Asham Mitzvah has to be geshachten in the north, because I might think that this Asham Mitzvah is different than a regular Asham Mitzvah. So that's why it says, so it's not extra to repeat. So how do you know that every Asham, it has to be shecht in the north, and then it's ma'akev? The Torah did not repeat it twice, a second time, redundantly. And says the Gemara, Imkei nichta b'hai v'lo nichta b'hai. Let it the Torah just write that an asham has to be geshachten in the north, and I would know the asham mitzvah has to be geshachten in the north, and every other asham I will know from the mitzvah. The fact that the Torah wrote the word north twice, basically by a regular asham and by an asham mitzvah, this teaches you that it's ma'akev, that it's absolute. So hanichi svirlon yatzli de bedavar chadesh ihu hu delay gama maklalai. Aval, we go to Amid Beis. Aval klalai gama minei shapir. Ella isvian delay gama hu gama maklalai v'le klalai gama minei chay legufa yitzrach. What the Gemara is saying is that if the Torah only wrote that Asham Mitzvah has to be geshachten in the north, I would think that it only applies by an Asham Mitzvah and not by a regular Asham, because Asham Mitzvah is unique anyway. So the Torah gave it a bunch of new ideas. It has to be the blood on the ear and the thumb and the toe, and so therefore it has parts like a regular Asham, and then it has to be geshachten in the north. I wouldn't be able to say that every other Asham has to be shachten in the north. So really, that's why the Torah had to write by every Asham that it's geshachten in the north. And says the Gemara, so therefore then, and it had to write by Asham B'tzayres geshachten in the north, so it's not extra. And says the Gemara, Kivin ahadre ahadre. But yes, at the bottom line, it is written twice in the Torah. Even though you can say, I needed to write about Asham Mitzvah, but once we already put Asham Mitzvah very similar to a regular Asham, so it seems that the Torah is saying that the Asham the Asham Mitzvah is like a regular Mitzvah, like a regular Asham, and the Torah is like repeating that a regular Asham also has to be done in the north, because by saying an Asham Mitzvah is like a regular Asham, so it's like saying every Asham needs to be brought in the north. So therefore, it's as if it's written twice that every Asham has to be geshachten in the north, and that's why I know by an Asham it's ma'akev. Amalei Marzutra b'reid Rav Mari l'Ravina. So Marzutra said to Ravina, "Ema ki hadre kro legabe matan tame emer in the boyakuna, avashchited loy boyakuna loy me boyatzafim." Maybe there was a good reason why the Torah had to write that the Asham Tzara is geschachten in the north. Why? Because if the Torah, I would have thought that the Torah only said an Asham Tzara is like a regular Asham, is only by the giving of the blood, like a Amorim, because that has to be done by a Kohen. Shechita, that doesn't need to be done by Kohen. I might think it doesn't need Safine. So that's why the Torah had to tell you that Asham Tzara, even the Shechita, which is not done by a Kohen, has to be done in the north. So basically, again, the Gemara is like sticking with it, that the Torah had to write that it has to be done in the north, and it's not extra that an Asham Tzara, that the Torah had to write, it has to be slaughtered in the north. So again, you don't have a double pasuk that tells you by a regular Asham it has to be done in the north. And says the Gemara, name kra kachatas hu. My kachatas ha'asham hu. Why does it repeat the word ha'asham? Kishar asham is yishio. It's as if it's like every other asham. So it already says at one time that an asham tzara is like a regular asham. So then why does the Torah have to repeat that it's geshachtin in the north? So that's telling you twice. The Torah is really telling you basically by every asham it has to be geshachtin in the north. It's extra that it says by asham tzara that it has to be geshachtin in the north. So that tells you that this idea that a carbon asham that must be slaughtered in the north is absolute. It's not just a mitzvah. If you don't slaughter in the north, it's pasal. Now, going back to that pasuk of and this is the final part of the daf. Going back to the pasuk of a shachat of the asham, this pasuk over here. It tells you to shech the asham tzayra in the place that you shech the chatas and the oila. Well, it's trying to tell you that you shech the asham tzayra, the sheep, in the north. So why does it say that it has to be geshachten in the place that you shech the chatas and oila? Why do you have to say to compare it to both of them? That's the Gemara's question. Why do I have to compare it to a chatas? And why does the Torah have to compare the asham tzayra to an oila to tell you it has to be geshachten in the north? Amar Ravina said like this: Itzdrach, I akshi lechatas or akshi leoila havamina. I would have thought chatas mehechel lamda ma'oila dava malam mehekish choyzim malam mehekish. If the Gemara is saying like this, had it only compared the asham to a chatas, it wouldn't work. Because how does chatas, it has to be geshachten in the north? That's from a hekish to oila. Once chatas learned its idea that it has to be shachtin in the north from a hekesh to oila, it can't teach you. It can't go around and teach it to an oil, to an asham. Therefore, the Torah had to say that this asham is like an oila, because oila is the primary source where, as we've been saying all day, is the primary source where a carbon has to be geshachtin in the north. So therefore, had it only been compared to a chatas, I would not know an asham has to be slaughtered in the north. So okay, so then so the next question is, let the Torah just say it's only like an oila, not like a chatas. Answers the Gemara, I would think that if the Torah straight out went ahead and compared the asham to the oila, I would say that really the Torah could have gone and compared it to a chatas, but it compared it to an oila because it's more clearer. By an oila, that has to be geshacht in the north, but the Torah could have compared it also to a chatas. So the Torah compares it to a chatas and then compares it to an oila to show you that comparing it to a chatas is not good enough. It has to be because once a chatas knows its idea that it has to be in the north from a hekesh to oila, it cannot teach it. It cannot go around and teach it to an asham. And that's this idea in this, what I'm trying to say in the picture on the screen here. This is a din by what you call it, by kachim, only by kachim. And the idea you see in the green is something that is learned from a hekesh, right? If you have something that learned a halacha from a hekesh, it cannot teach it to another din in kachim via a hekesh. And that's this idea of davar halam hekesh cannot go around and teach it. So that's why. That's why the Gemara says, therefore, that's what I spoke out. Lahachi akshe lechatas v'akshe le'oila. Back into the Gemara. The reason the Torah compared the Asher Mitzayra to a chatas and an oila, lemema, to teach you the idea, dama lamed behekesh, einay choyzer melamed behekesh. Something that's taught with a hekesh, learned from a hekesh, cannot go reteach something else. So chatas, the idea that it has to be slaughtered in the north was learned from a hekesh to oila, cannot teach it to asham. That's why the Torah says, "Oh, I would have done compared asham to a chatas," but that's not good enough. That's why I'm telling you that it's compared to an oilam. That's the idea that the Torah is teaching you. Davar lam behekesh, ein choyzim alam behekesh. Rava says, Rava says mahachad. Ksiv, the pasuk says, kasher yuram mishar zevach hashlamim, lamai hilkasa. Ili asar zakavish de kaloyis begufei ksiv. By a par koyin Mashiach, it says that the par koyin Mashiach is like a zevach hashlamim. So if it's trying to teach you that Parkei Mashiach is like a shlomim that you have to be makriv the Yeseres Hakavin and the Shtei Kloyos, it already says that by Parkei Mashiach. Mishum demoya mure Yeseres Hakavin Shtei Kloyos from Parhelim Dava Shatziba l'Sirei Avodah Zarah. Since the Torah, basically what the Gemara is going to go through saying in the exercise is like this, that really Parhelim Dava Shatziba teaches the idea of Yeseres Hakavin and Kloyos to Seirei Avodah Zarah. Okay, that's what the Gemara is basically saying. Now, if it's teaching you to Seirei Avodah Zarah, how does Parahelim Davashat Sibor know its idea that it has Yeseres Hakavin Shtei Kloyos? There's a hekesh. But also Lapar, the par compares the Parahelim Davashat Sibor to the Par Kohen Mashiach, as you can see on the screen. So and that wouldn't be enough, since the Parhelm David Shatziba only knows Yeseres Hakaved and Shtei Kloyos through a hekesh. It wouldn't be able to teach Sira Avodas Chachamim that it needs Yeseres Hakaved and Shtei Kloyos. So the Torah wrote Kash Yurim Shar Zevach Hashlamim to say that it's almost as if it says it outright Shtei Kloyos and Yeseres Hakaved actually by the Parhelm Shadavar Shatziba, that the Parhelm Shadavar Shatziba is like a shlamim, and therefore it's almost as if the Torah wrote Yeseres Hakavin Shtei Kloyos by Parahalim Davash Tzibor. So it's a primary source. It could teach Shirei Avodas Chachamim. So then the Gemara says, then why do you need the hekesh for Parahalim Davash Tzibor to Par Kohen Mashiach? To teach you that idea that the hekesh wasn't enough, and that you need it to be if you need it to be written by its primary source in order for it to teach something else. That's why the Torah went out of its way to say hekesh plus to make it as a primary source. Amalei Rapampa, the Hachi Yitzrach Kashim, the heavy command the Kasab Begufel, the heavy Davar Love and Hekesh, Chayzim Lam Hekesh. Amalei Rapampa, the Rava Lichte Begufel Nakish. So the Gemara says, "I Kasab Begufel Akash having Davar Lam Hekesh, Chayzim Lam Hekesh." Chi Tema Nakshi Akushe. Maybe if the Torah would have written Kash Yurim Zevach Hashlam and not have a Hekesh, I would say, oh, the Torah just wants to give you a primary source. But Davar Halam Hekesh could work with a Hekesh. That's why the Torah wrote it out by Par Helam Davar Shatzibar and made a Hekesh. L'meimer to teach you Davar Halam Hekesh Ein Choyzem Melamed Behekesh. So that's an idea that we're going to deal with tomorrow. Bez Hashem. This idea that something in kachim, only by kachim, if it's an idea that's learned by a hekesh, it cannot go teach it to another carbon. It cannot go reteach it to another carbon. Okay, we're going to fill in this chart tomorrow. Okay, we'll stop right over here.
Thank you.